where it goes. And that's another little session we'll pick up. But I had a really weird guy sit on this floor and trace maps, historic maps, and then engrave them in this plaster cast he made. And what we were trying to do is take the Calusa Hatchery basically from here up, pretty much from where the Franklin locks are. So this is kind of a representation from historic maps of what it was like before the 1880s. And we do know from the Calusa records, the Calusas had their slaves connect the wetland systems between these lakes and had a settlement up here. So it was a dugout canoe kind of thing that connected marshes together. There was a waterfall here just below Lake Flirt. So when you go through LaBelle, heading toward Okeechobee, as soon as you get out of town, there's a subdivision there, and I always forget the name of it. And you can see some big oak trees there in that subdivision. That was the edge, where those oak trees are, was the edge of Lake Flirt. The Men's brothers from down here in Fort Myers, I just happen to know this because their sister was a librarian at Cypress Lake School when I was teaching there. During the conference room, I'd pump her for all the information. The Men's brothers got the contract. They ran the mailboat and everything, but they did any little odd jobs. They were the ones that dynamited the waterfall. Because Hamilton Diston knew that to drain Lake Okeechobee and its contract with the state at 5 cents an acre, if he could drain the Everglades and make it, farmable and developable, get Florida out of bankruptcy. And so when he looked at Florida, he knew you couldn't get water south any faster than it was going. There's no downhill. Mark Twain once said, water moves downhill everywhere except toward money. So, that comes back a little later in the story.
What year would that have been when you grew up in the waterfall?
That had to be, geez, my mind right now, John, 18, that was really just before the turn of the century.
1988.
Yeah, and look at all these little creeks. Every one of those little creeks was bringing crystal clear water into the Calusa Hatchery. And look at those meanders. They couldn't even get a steamboat to Alva without putting a come-along with horses to pull the front of the boat around to get the oranges at Alva. That's as hard as you could take a steamboat, they tell me. We got to get Jim English and some of the old timers here telling you the stories of what it was like growing here. That's the kind of stuff that gets people tuned into, what was and why it's the way it is today. So, crystal clear water. Bartman's Travels, he was on the Calusa Hatchery, he wrote some wonderful things about the Calusa Hatchery. When you take a look at what's been transformed now, you got the straight line. So the Calusa Hatchery isn't a river above the Franklin locks. Right, John? It's a C-43. Corps of Engineers doesn't use names. Oh. C stands for canal, S stands for structure. So the S-78 is the Franklin locks, right? And C, the C-43. A quick story. When I got on the Water Management District, I hooked up with a woman there were two of us that were the poorest people that ever served in the district. A teacher and a garden club lady who was a political dynamo in Palm Beach County. And when Rock Salt got appointed colonel, was coming down to be the new colonel engineer, and we knew he had an environmental interest. We got him aside during lunch and said, Rock, you've got to take a boat trip from Fort Myers across the entire state to see what this all looks like, And he said, that's a good idea. We worked on it, and we do it in 2 stages. We go from Fort Myers to Clewiston, stay at the Clewiston Inn, go across Okeechobee the next day, and down to St. Lucie. So we did that. But I got a call about a week before the Corps boat was supposed to arrive. And this woman from Jacksonville called me and said, Dr. Hammond, could you tell me where the Calusa Hatchery River pickup is supposed to be? We don't know where that is. And this is from Jacksonville. And I thought for a minute, and I said, C-43, look down below the Franklin locks, and the pickups of the Fort Myers Yacht Basin, right? C-43, yes, we have now,
Now
they
you know
have
what
it,
you're
right?
saying.
But that's how, institutionalized that the institution can get, right? So, Tom Savage was down here in 1957, 58. He was a biologist for what was then the Department of Natural Resources. And he had done surveys of all the bays around the state of Florida. And he had come down the East Coast, and he had come down the West Coast from the Panhandle, and he got to Southwest Florida. And when he got in Estero Bay, he said, I've never seen seagrasses so lush. The whole system is just one of the best in the state. His report led to the first aquatic reserve being declared by the governor. At the same, not long after, about that same period, Arthur Marshall was doing a study for the siting of a power plant. And Art came and wrote a report on Calusa Hatchie. And he said, the Calusa Hatchie is one of the most dynamic and lush in the entire state of Florida. He said that Vallisneria beds at Harney Point had thousands and thousands of ducks on it. You know where Harney Point is?
Did you go through those?
This point that sticks
Right
out,
across
the
from
Cape
us.
Royale,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
that's where we live.
Had another name then, they had to take off the maps. But at any rate, those were the kind of reports that were going up to the state that led to things like the aquatic preserve. And Arthur also did the Sanibel Causeway studies and had a lot of things to say about how great this system still was in the 50s and early 60s. He helped us on Orange River with the manatee problems, and that's another story. But basically, see the brown up there, Charlotte County? About the county line, that's all flat land. And all the land across here is pretty flat. So water just sat. Jim English used to tell me when they go having to go cow hunting during the summer, they would wade waist deep up into what's now Babcock Ranch. Try and find cattle up there. And all through where FGCU is, used to have 3 feet of water on it all summer. That water sat and seeped into the ground. It created the groundwater for the fall and the winter, right? If you look at the north side of the river, when you get to the county line, flat as can be, and then it drops about 23 to 28 feet. There's a downhill there. And that downhill is why when you go across the north side of the river, there's a creek about every mile or half mile, right? And they're incised creeks. Because of the downhill, they have velocity, so they carve, like the northern creeks do, right? They're really cool, beautiful, right in the limestone. You get into them, Telegraph Creek, Trout Creek, Owl Creek, all those creeks. And when the guy a couple of people were crazy, they rode around the state of Florida, and they were the ones that mapped the entire edge of Florida in the 1800s. They had a sailboat and a couple of rowboats. It's amazing how accurate their map was. But when they got to the Calusa Hatchie, when you read the report, it says, the Calusa Hatchie River south side of the Calusa Hatchie River is not fit for man nor beast. Because it was so damn wet. Now, Jim English taught me when I first moved here, and we were challenging the building of the locks when they wanted to dredge the river in the 1960s. And Jim was an agricultural guy, challenging that they should not dredge the Calusa Hatchie. And what he pointed out was, if you dredge this section up here and dynamite the cap rock that's underneath it, the reason the south side of the river was so wet was all that seepage that was coming down into those creeks was also had enough head or pressure to come underneath that cap rock and rise on the south side of the river. And he said there are springs in the Calusa Hatchie that seep through that rock where it's cracked.
Yeah.
Right? And you're going to destroy that whole spring system in the Calusa Hatchie of that fresh water coming out. And sure enough, when they did that, we saw a whole change in the characteristic of water quality. Long before all of the pollutants and everything, were coming down the river once it was now a canal.